G'day, I'm Matt Stewart, comedian and history buff from Melbourne, Australia. You're listening to History from A to Zonked on Hatch Plus.
Good evening. What a pleasure to be here once again. I know I've said it before, but I couldn't think of another place I'd want to be in the world than hanging out with you tonight. Give me a time machine, and I want to be right here with you, lulling you and I to sleep with a quirky tale from history. That's what this show is. And tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that centers around French Emperor Napoleon. You might be thinking, oh, Napoleon. I've heard of him. He was one of the characters in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Or, unless you're talking about the dog Napoleon from those films about a dog named Napoleon. I haven't seen them, but I'm pretty sure they exist. No, I'm talking about the real human, the French Emperor Napoleon. But not about one of his big famous battles. You know, everyone knows he lost in Waterloo, at Waterloo. Probably didn't lose in it. I don't know, maybe he did. So I'm not going to talk about one of those big famous battles, at least not one of the ones where he took on humans. I guess you fight enough wars, humans versus humans, and you start, wanting to get out there and try a different species of opponent. And that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. I'm going to tell you about the time he faced one of his great ever adversaries, some bunny rabbits. This story tickled me when I read it, so hopefully you'll find it interesting as well. If by chance you don't know who Napoleon is, according to Britannica, he was one of the most celebrated personages in the history of the West. I like personages. He wasn't a celebrated person. He was a celebrated personage. And it doesn't get much better than that. He revolutionized military organization and training, sponsored the Napoleonic Code. No coincidence. I think it was named after him, which was the prototype of later civil law codes. He also reorganized education and established the long-lived concordat with the papacy. Now, please don't ask me what that means. Let's not worry about that now. You don't want to be thinking, oh, should I Google that? Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. It's got no relevance to the story. I only said it because it sounded fun. So, Napoleon, he's a dominant figure in European history over the last few hundred years. And he has a reputation as a kind of a brilliant military mind, a brilliant military commander. But of course, he also suffered defeats throughout his famed career. Not that many, though. The general consensus seems to be that he won something like 80 to 90% of his battles. And a lot of those he was vastly outnumbered in, which happens again in this story I talk about tonight. Bit of a spoiler there. He loses this one. Even though it was slightly lower stakes, I still think probably seen as a pretty embarrassing loss. And maybe that's why you don't see it written about too much. And I think that might be because the stories you read around, they all seem to go back to this one story that was written about by one of his generals in his memoir. The guy, I'm holding back on giving you his name because it's very impressive. My French pronunciation is not a strong suit of mine. But if you ask me, will I have a go anyway? I'd say, yeah, oui, monsieur. Oui, monsieur, I will. So his full name, one of Napoleon's generals, Paul Charles Francois Adrien Henri Dieudonné Theobald. Like I said, I think with every name, I was slightly less confident in the pronunciation. Started with Paul Charles, happy with that. Ends with Dieudonné Theobald, which I'm almost 100% sure is not being correctly pronounced. But maybe for short, I should just call him PCFAHDT. Would that make it easier? Or maybe even better than that, I'll just call him Theobald. So in a section of his book, which was translated into English, thank goodness for you and me. You probably didn't want to hear me doing this in French tonight. In his memoir, one small section is titled Napoleon's Rabbit Shooting. And in it he talks about this relatively leisurely summer for Napoleon. Obviously he was in battles throughout his adult life, but seems like he had a bit of a down summer this year. And even the year that it happened seems to be disputed, but somewhere in the first decade of the 19th century, I believe. And yeah, they were having fun going out on these hunts, but they were racking their brains thinking about what's another activity we can do. Then one of Napoleon's right-hand men, maybe even one of his real confidants, came up with a brilliant idea. Why don't we do more hunting? That's genius stuff. So this guy named Louis Alexander Berthier suggested that they could do some rabbit hunting in a park he owned just outside of Paris. Apparently he was pretty stoked when Napoleon accepted the offer. It's like, yeah, what? Are you saying yes to my idea? The Napoleon? It really sounds like the emperor's inner circle were pretty desperate for his approval. And this was seen as a big win for him. According to Theobald, in his memoir, the property possessed everything calculated to make the sport agreeable, except rabbits. I would say that rabbits are one of the key ingredients to a rabbit hunt. But luckily, getting hold of rabbits was no big deal. So Theobald ordered 1,000 bunnies to be delivered for the morning of the hunt. I read elsewhere that the number was even bigger, but once you get into the thousands, for a small handful of guys to shoot at, that's a lot of rabbits. That's the main thing. So skipping forward to the day of the hunt, everything was going to plan. I like Theobald's writing, so I quote him here. He puts it quite poetically. At length, all was ready. The emperor had been expected. The emperor had arrived. A splendid breakfast had been served. The accessories made way for the principal business. The sport began, and Berthier was in high delight at having been granted the honour of giving his master some healthy pastime with the opportunity of distinguishing himself. You get the feeling that Theobald doesn't really like Berthier that much. He really builds up like Berthier's really giddy about having organised this little event for Emperor Napoleon. And yeah, me personally, picturing 1,000+ rabbits being released at the same time, it doesn't seem like a super sporting event, especially this guy's like Napoleon. He's able to defeat armies. Feels like he'd want to make it a little more sporting. Napoleon and his mates probably couldn't miss if they tried. I think shooting rabbits in a horde would be like shooting fish in a barrel. You know what I mean? You couldn't miss. Well, that's what I thought anyway. But as it turned out, it was rather difficult. And this is where things went awry. So when the animals were released from their cages, rather than scatter and attempt to head for freedom, like that's what I would do if I was one of those rabbits. I'd be like, oh my God, I'm out of the cage. Off I go. Instead, though, as a kind of heaving mass, they all turned around and headed straight for their would-be killers. They weren't afraid of these guys with guns. They might not have even known Napoleon's reputation as being a great military man. Of course, old Theobald put it much more elegantly than me, writing, all those rabbits, which should have tried in vain, even by scattering themselves to escape the shots which the most august hand destined for them, suddenly collected first in knots, then in a body. Instead of having recourse to a useless flight, they all faced about, and in an instant the whole phalanx flung itself upon Napoleon. Theobald, the old dog, we've done it again. Away with words. So yeah, Napoleon, one of the great military leaders, is now under attack by this huge heaving mass of fluff. Berthier, in the meantime, he'd gone from being proud as punch, feeling like, I've done it. What a great moment for me. I've put on an event for the great man Napoleon. He was feeling like that 1 minute. And then next minute, I guess he just wanted to disappear, wanted the earth to open up and swallow him. To avert further embarrassment, he pulled together a group of coachmen who had these big whips. I think he grabbed a whip himself even, and they went to fight back against this admittedly adorable herd. You call them a herd of rabbits? Horde of rabbits. Apparently you do call it. You can call it a herd of rabbits, a nest of rabbits, or a colony of rabbits. I mean, there's heaps of them actually. A bevy of rabbits, a drove of rabbits, a flick of rabbits, a fluffle of rabbits. Who gets to decide these things anyway? I'm getting sidetracked. Apologise for that. So yeah, they go at the rabbits with these whips, and that's enough to sort of spook them. The rabbits turn around and bounce away. But like I say, Theobald doesn't seem like he's a big fan of Bertha, and in his memoirs, he quotes the first consul of the field of Marengo, who said, quote, "Bertha is not of the stuff of which they say brave men are made." Bit of sass there. Cop that. I love how memoirs, even ones written a couple hundred years ago, are similar to now. A few scores to settle in there as well. And yeah, I think Theobald seems to suggest that this little zinger about Bertha not being made of what brave men are made might have hurt him enough to see this chance, to see this moment with the rabbits coming at Napoleon as his chance to prove his tough guy credentials. And at first, this seemed somewhat successful. They saw the incident as a bit of a comical delay. But anyway, the rabbits are off again. Let's get these guns ready and go shoot some of them. The hunt was about to begin. But no, that's what they were thinking. Unfortunately for Big Bertha, the rabbits were a more formidable opponent than expected. It was almost as if they were using military tactics back against Napoleon, because they came again in another assault on the emperor and his party. As Theobald explains, by a wheel in 3 bodies to right and left, the intrepid rabbits turned the emperor's flank, attacked him frantically in the rear, refused to quit their hold, piled themselves up between his legs till they made him stagger, and forced the conqueror of conquerors, fairly exhausted, to retreat and leave them in possession of the field. The rabbits win. I wonder if his human opponents on the battlefield ever thought about that, either releasing rabbits at him or behaving like rabbits. Let's go bouncing at this guy. We'll take him down. Yeah, so it does feel a bit strange. Probably not how you would expect rabbits to behave in that situation. As it turns out, Bertha wanted to set up this great day for his boss. He sent off one of his underlings to purchase some rabbits, but it sounds like he didn't specify what kind of rabbits they needed to be. Wild rabbits. And the guy brought back 1,000 plus tame bunnies. So these things, they didn't see humans as dangerous, something to be feared. They saw them as meal tickets. You know, oh, they'll have food for us. Let's go get it. Let's go get the food. Where's the food? So they're running at Napoleon, expecting him to hold out a carrot, not a stick. So when those guys came with the whips, they must have been quite confused. I say meal tickets. Of course, Theobald writes it better than me. He says, the poor rabbits had taken the sportsmen, including the emperor, for the purveyors of their daily cabbage. Now that is good writing. I don't care where you're from. This is a guy who, you know, his career was in war, but he wrote some good books too. Apparently there's a bunch of things that, you know, might have been lost to history if Theobald didn't get it down on paper. And, you know, he continues to lay the boots in, Theobald, writing, the laughter which this revelation elicited may be guessed, also the way in which it added to Berthia's despair. In his shame and confusion, regretting the ridicule even more than the fact, he vowed, a little late in the day, that he would not be taken in again. Fool me once, rabbits, shame on me, etc. So yeah, it's a funny little tale there, but it doesn't sound like Napoleon lost any respect for him. He later said, Napoleon of Bertha, he later said that he was the man who has served me longest and has never failed me. So he didn't even count this as a failure, if you take him at his word there. And like I was saying before, Napoleon obviously suffered that defeat at Waterloo, but unfortunately Berthier died shortly before that. And this shows how much respect Napoleon had for him. He said that if Berthier was present at the Battle of Waterloo, the result would have been different, saying, quote, "If Berthier had been there, I would not have met this misfortune." So hopefully Berthier focused on these positives and didn't worry too much about the whole rabbit thing. Hopefully you enjoyed that tale. It's just quite a bizarre one. And hopefully you're feeling nice and sleepy now and you're ready for a good night's kip, as I am. I'm going to hit the hay soon after this. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. Thanks so much. And looking forward to chatting to you again. This has been History from A to Zonked, and I'm Matt Stewart, signing off.